people were pointing to the bamboo as the cause of these things. This city is built on bamboo. It's actually more the other materials that were used in this big renovation project. Some of the workers scrambled to go and buy some compliant netting, but they only affixed it to the lower floors so that they would pass the safety inspections.
Above this, of course, is the general, the massive amount of grief and anger that's in society right now. They have been able to stop all the protests and stop most of the dissent from Hong Kong in the past 5 or 6 years, and this may undo that.
Hello and welcome to the forecast. It's been called the fire of the century. The blaze that engulfed 7 high-rise residential buildings in Hong Kong's Tai Po district was the deadliest the city has seen in over 70 years. 156 people are known to have died, 30 are still missing, while 15 people have been arrested for alleged manslaughter in connection with the fire. Grief has understandably overwhelmed the city and fueled an uncontrollable anger towards those in power. Today, almost a week after the fire, we ask, how did this tragedy unfold? Why is Hong Kong still enraged? And what does it tell us about the city that once prided itself on its transparency and democracy? Well, joining me now from Hong Kong are Tom Grundy, founder and editor of the local media Hong Kong Free Press, and Selina Chung, chair of the Hong Kong Journalists Association. Welcome to you both. Tom, if I could start with you. I mean, we've seen the pictures of this fire. It was truly extraordinary, even for those, living in a city that had the Grenfell fire from a few years ago. How did this thing happen?
Initially, people were looking at the bamboo, especially international observers. It may look disastrous to folks, from outside, and we can talk about that a bit later, but it's actually more the other materials that were used in this big renovation project, this £32 million renovation project, whereby there was netting to prevent things from falling down, that at first was thought to be compliant. It had passed tests. And in the last couple of days, we've learned that it indeed wasn't. There was also styrofoam, some foam boards put on the outside of windows that exacerbated the spread of the flames. And the fire alarms were faulty. But to get down to the nitty-gritty, what has occurred is that this renovation was costing about £17,500 for each of the households. Now, workers had allegedly installed substandard netting to replace some damaged material after a series of typhoons in Hong Kong that were always also international news. And then there was a chain of other fires, other bamboo scaffolding sort of renovations going on around the city. So some of the workers scrambled to go and buy some compliant netting, but they only affixed it to the lower floors so that they would pass the safety inspections. Right. A compliant roll of netting cost £5.40. The dodgy stuff cost £1. So they saved just over £10,000, and now 156 people are dead.
Extraordinary. I mean, I must say, the first time I arrived in Hong Kong many years ago and saw bamboo scaffolding outside, some incredibly, granite, glass, funky skyscrapers, I thought, what's going on here? But actually, bamboo is an incredibly efficient way, because it's so elastic and so sturdy, of using scaffolding around high-rise blocks. I just didn't know that. Tell us about the area, Selina, where, these people lived. I think it was called Wang Fuk Court, exactly, in Tai Po. So tell us about Wang Fuk Court and tell us about Tai Po. What kind of people lived there?
So Wang Fuk Court is a kind of like government-built subsidized housing, but they are owned by property owners who bought them years ago. So a lot of the people living there are middle class, or they built their families up from decades ago, in the 80s and the 90s. It's located in an area that is quite central to a region we call New Territory. So it's sort of in an urban area that's right at the outskirts of the bustling business districts of Hong Kong. It's very residential, but it's also close to nature. And so a lot of people will live there because the cost of living is relatively lower than if people were living on Hong Kong Island or in the central areas of Kowloon, and they would then commute to the town. It would take maybe around an hour, until recently where a new train line was extended. So it's got a lot of population in that district, and the Wangfu Court is a pretty sort of big housing estate close to the train station, and a lot of people commuting into Taipo area will have passed by Wangfu Court. And next is another sort of lower income housing estate, so they're sort of side by side, which is very common kind of urban planning in Hong Kong. So I'd say overall the population in Wangfu Court, the sort of around the middle class, they're not the lowest income kind of population, but they're not either very well off.
And Tom, just to get back to the fire briefly, what really struck me, and I think most observers here, is that you had not just one tower block that went up in flames, but many. How did the fire manage to jump from one tower block to another with such ease?
Well, that's been investigated now by the police and an anti-corruption watchdog. But you can imagine as these, netting is flying around that, I mean, when we were down there on the first night, some of the embers seemed to end up in a nearby school, and the firefighters had to go and put out that. So one of them remained unaffected, and some residents are going back to retrieve their belongings in the next day or two. But it spread very fast. It was a number 5 alarm. We haven't seen one of those. It's the highest level in like 17 years. But Hong Kong does have a history of dramatic, lethal fires over a century. And each time, because this is a laissez-faire, not many regulations in Hong Kong economy, each time they've brought in more and more safeguards. But ultimately, this as the months and years pass, we might get down to the real nitty-gritty here, which could be, corruption in the ranks of these building committees, which has long been a story in Hong Kong as well.
So one thing, Tom, that's come up is this, is the importance of bamboo as a scaffolding, but also more than that, bamboo and identity politics in Hong Kong. Can you just explain that to me, please?
People got a little bit, hot-headed about having the early parts of this crisis. People were pointing to the bamboo as the cause of these things. This city is built on bamboo, if you will. And like the neon, you've been to Hong Kong, it's an iconic site in the city. It may look disastrous to foreign eyes, it's metal that's used everywhere else, but it's super fast, it's versatile. Like Lego, you can create sort of shapes very awkwardly in nooks and crannies in a city that has the highest population density in the world. And any Hong Konger downstairs will tell you that it's stronger than steel. Mainland firms have really struggled to bid for construction projects sometimes in Hong Kong because they're just used to using steel, and bamboo scaffolders, are highly skilled. It's a dying art. They are going to phase it out even before this crisis. So I think some people jump to conclusions a bit here, but Hong Kongers here and especially abroad see it as a kind of iconic, identifying sort of thing in Hong Kong, and something that, and this is the key thing, differentiates the city from the mainland. And the Hong Kong identity is constantly perceived to be under threat. And so people were very defensive about the robustness of bamboo. And actually, I went down today and you can see that the bamboo has largely survived this blaze. And the real cause was, of course, the netting, the styrofoam and things like that. So it looks like.
That's fascinating. So they're not using bamboo in Shanghai or Beijing. They're just using it in Hong Kong.
They do still in parts of the mainland, but it's very iconic in Syria. I've been walking around today and you're kind of seeing these naked buildings because they've been pulling down this netting. I saw it happening in real time. But it's still an incredible sight to behold. And like spiders, these highly skilled construction people go up and down. It's a dying art. It's a little more expensive, I believe, but it's very versatile and fast in this fast-moving, very dense city.
And if your main point of differentiation between you in Hong Kong, supposedly free, and the mainland, not so free, is bamboo scaffolding, I guess you've got a bit of a problem, haven't you?
It's not the only point of differentiation. The entire identity crisis, I suppose, this city that is a borrowed place on borrowed time, a lot of the time, always going down to some countdown. Its identity was often based on what differentiated it from China. And now we see whether it's through the demographics, the economics, the physical sort of changes in terms of the new border crossings or structures like the bridge to Macau or all of the ports, the economic links. It is, as you mentioned, the authorities want it to be seen as a sort of Greater Bay Area identity with that area in southern China, Shenzhen, Guangdong. So people can be very defensive about those things that still give Hong Kong its charm or the difference between here and just 20 miles north in mainland China.
Selina, we know that there are investigations going on, and I think 15 people have been charged with manslaughter. Who are the people of Hong Kong blaming?
Interestingly, the people of Hong Kong are not so much passing the blame onto the construction company or the workers or the executives of these companies, but the whole system around which the renovation project came about. So it was in around 2009 when the government passed a policy where certain buildings would be issued with mandatory inspection orders. And if the inspection didn't go well, they would be required by law to hire a renovation company to do exterior renovation, basically, to make sure that the bits and pieces are not falling from the building and hurting people or other things around the safety of the building. And so this means when entire housing estate is under an inspection order, they are required to do the renovation within a certain period of time. And the ownership corporation, the building committee, formed by people who are property owners, will have to go through the tendering process. And a lot of the renovation companies are basically ganging up on the property owners because they have limited time to do this and they have to do it. And this means that there are a lot of corruption going on. Some of the construction companies, they are basically the same people forming different companies in the process to join the tender together. They fix the prices. And or they may be colluding with the owners corporation, the people running that committee, to force the whole building to chip in for the project. So this is a very, very common problem in Hong Kong, and basically all of the property owners would know something about the process or have been through how painful it is. It's difficult enough to get a building with thousands of property owners to agree to chip in on something that is very expensive. And so there's been a lot of effort in Hong Kong trying to, tell the government that this policy is not working, and instead it's fostering the corruption of the construction industry in Hong Kong. And so in this situation, people see that happening because the Wongford Court residents last year basically revolted against their own ownership corporation, thinking that it was corrupt, and disagreed with the contractor that was being hired, the very contractor now that is accused of manslaughter. And they were unable to do that. They were able to basically overthrow the ownership corporation, but they were not able to cancel the contract that was already signed. And if they were to...
Why weren't they able to do that? Who blocked them?
Property owners formed factions among themselves, and they were able to call extraordinary general meetings and, votes of no confidence to overthrow the previous ownership corporation. And however, by then, the contract for the renovation has been signed, and they were not able to void it. If they did, they could be sued, and it would be a very lengthy legal process and could increase the ultimate cost of the renovation. So they just went ahead with what was said by the previous term, basically. And so a lot of people in Hong Kong understand this process very well, and they understand how it came about, how a negligent company was selected and, led to this outcome. So no, I wouldn't say that people were passing the blame or feeling very, at least emotionally passing the blame onto those 15 people arrested, but they very much noticed the system that created all these failures. And ultimately, I would say everything that can go wrong has gone wrong for this housing estate that led to 156 lives being lost.
And, Tom, the way Selina describes it, it's quite a familiar tale. We have similar issues between leaseholders and freeholders and big construction companies in this country. But to what extent does this kind of problem, this systemic problem, get coverage in the Hong Kong media? And do the people that are now being blamed get cover from the political class, from the political leadership in Hong Kong?
I mean, well, talking about the UK, this does have echoes of the Grenfell disaster, as well. But to actually dig down into how that kind of scam works with these building committees, there will be vested interests that sort of stage a coup to take control of that governing committee. They install friendly security companies, cleaning firms, shops with some kickbacks going on, and ultimately the property management company. But it's the building repairs that are the most lucrative. That's where you see the inflated costs and the kind of substandard work that you saw at Wangford Court. So with bid rigging, you're going to see some parties that will sort of take it in turns to liaise with each other, generally over the phone with no paper trail, of course, to ensure a pre-selected winner through artificially inflated bids. And the losing bidders might get, lucrative subcontracts or whatever. But that's sort of how it works. And there is meant to be some sort of accountability process that you're asking about. Unhappy residents can approach the Lands Tribunal. But and there is this building management ordinance to govern this stuff.
Yeah.
The fact is, it's very slow and it's very expensive. And Chief Executive John Lee, Hong Kong's leader this morning, did sort of allude to this kind of problem in Hong Kong in terms of reform. But the real questions now is when he says there's going to be an independent inquiry, is it going to go through an ordinance we have for that, which actually is empowered to subpoena people? And he talks about a judge leading it. We've seen a lot of handpicked judges for like national security cases. We're now under the national security era. So how is this kind of investigation going to pan out? And the ultimate question, there seems to be a bit of impatience with people so far who are pointing the finger at the government. Is this new era in Hong Kong, is there going to be that capacity to sort of self-criticize and see if there are any wrongdoing or any issues or things that need revamping, within the government and all these? It was inspected a week before this fire as well, as much as it has been said that they have pulled a fast one with this netting. So the question is, how deep are they going to go with this kind of probe?
Under the new national security law that was imposed by Beijing onto Hong Kong, in contravention of the one country, two systems arrangement, in the early stage of the pandemic, to what extent can these grievances be aired in the media, for instance, or in the public space without leading to repercussions or people getting arrested or getting fined? Selina, first you.
We have already started seeing some of the repercussions. At least 3 people have been arrested. I think questioned and on grounds of sedition after they've come up with petitions asking for an independent investigation or coordinating some of the aid efforts surrounding this disaster. The government hasn't started, as big of a widespread crackdown on speech like it did in 2020 and 21, but I wouldn't be surprised to see more arrests being made. And so today there were several people, I think they were somewhat of former politicians forming a group and, urging the government for action. They were going to make some policy recommendation to discuss, their viewpoints and called a press conference. And it was called off this morning. And 3 of the organizers were called in by National Security Police for questioning. And they were asked not to discuss what police, told them or asked them to do.
That's quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, so we're dealing with a construction issues, some dodgy materials, some very localized corruption, and yet you've got the national security police or the people who enforce the national security law getting involved at this level, calling people in for questioning, arresting some. What are they afraid of here? What do you think they're afraid of, Selina?
Yeah, my sense is that the calls for people to seek independent investigation to look at the systematic failures may touch on some nerves. And I would have to rewind a little bit into how these ownership corporations are run. They're very much tied to local politics. And, when you have district elections, different political parties in the past and politicians, they will try to exert their influence through these ownership corporations. So sometimes some of the ownership corporations would have advisors, external advisors, and some of these external advisors would be district councillors. They used to be mostly elected representatives. And so people would view some of the ownership corporations as being leaning towards a certain political party. And then, of course, by extension, if problems arise, they will, blame the influence that was going on and, wonder if, there were other kinds of conspiracies going on. And within housing estates in Hong Kong, other than ownership corporations, there used to be a kind of body called Mutual Aid Committee. They kind of were complementary with ownership corporations in the past, but with fewer powers to take decisions for their estate. And those mutual aid committees were seen as a kind of counterweight to ownership corporation after political problems in Hong Kong exacerbated. So the government disbanded almost all of these mutual aid committees to prevent activists or other pro-democracy elements from being able to act as that counterbalance. So I think there is a very strong sort of political undertone in all this, and the government also see it, and that's why that's part of the, I think it's part of the motivation for them to really clamp down on this heavy-handedly. But above this, of course, is the general, the massive amount of grief and anger that's in society right now, that's risking boiling over. They have been able to stop all the protests and stop most of the dissent from Hong Kong in the past 5 or 6 years, and this may undo that work that the Hong Kong government has been doing. And that's why during this delicate moment, I will not be surprised that the government tries very hard to control what people will do in public space to express that anger and grief.
Tom, describe that anger, because, I mean, the last time I was in Hong Kong was in 2019, when there was a lot of anguish and anger about an extradition law that was going to be introduced by the then Chief Executive Carrie Lam. She then ditched it. But there were a lot of people on the streets. And of course, the students took over some of the universities, and there was real trouble there. And there was anger. But how does that anger then compare to the anger that you've seen now?
It's hard to really say how folks feel. One student, 19 years old, Miles, he was handing out a petition urging accountability, asking for an independent probe. He was seemingly arrested. The police will not confirm it, but he left the police station yesterday and his petition disappeared. But look at the context here as to what happens in China when there are similar tragedies, disasters, whether it's Sichuan earthquake, train crash near Shanghai, or construction or financial scandals. There seems to be a little bit of breathing room for expression in the moments it occurs. But ultimately, to answer your earlier question, it is about control in terms of people organizing. And so an hour ago in this newsroom, I asked my staff, make sure you get people's contacts, folks who might be victims talking about this online. Their posts might disappear. They may be more reluctant to speak later. We've seen these sedition arrests for inciting hatred against the government, the kind of thing I thought might happen in weeks or months, not so quickly, to be honest, because you need a kind of pressure valve after these things happen. And yet here we are. But yeah, the authorities are allergic to people organizing. And I think that they're getting a bit of 2019 protest vibes from some of the things they've seen in terms of the speed of the reaction, the support networks, the websites that came up overnight at a level that really the government can only dream of in terms of an instant response, let alone messages on certain walls that resemble the pro-democracy so-called Lenin walls. Those were taken down last night. And a few other elements that have made them, I think, a little bit nervous as we go into a patriots-only election on Sunday.
And Selina, I guess there must be a lot of pent-up frustration and anger ever since the national security law was imposed and the whole democracy project was kind of shut down. Is that what we're seeing now, that this pent-up anger and frustration, that the fuse for that has literally been lit by this extraordinary fire?
Yeah. During the pro-democracy movement, a lot of the anger is towards the Hong Kong political system. how the government was formed and whether people were given a choice of their own government and representatives. This is different. This is preceded by immense grief. Anyone seeing such huge fire, so many lives lost, will feel immense grief. And we saw this yesterday and the day before when there were sort of memorials set up for people to lay their flowers and express that grief. And the queues were almost 2 kilometers long. People had to queue up for 2 to 3 hours before they even reached a memorial to just lay their flower, make a prayer of some sort. And I think over the 5 or 6 years past, at least for people who've stayed in Hong Kong instead of immigrating to places like UK or Canada, they have accepted the current system. They know that it's futile to resist it or to do much about it. They go about their lives, and they will accept it to the extent that Hong Kong is able to guarantee them personal safety and some level of good governance. And now we see that is pierced. And so people realize that even if they didn't come out with political demands, their lives could truly be threatened by the system that is currently in place. So that makes this anger dangerous and a challenge to the current government.
And Selena, just on the question of grief, I mean, most of Hong Kong, I'm guessing, lives in places like the tower blocks that burnt down in these tall high-rise buildings with relatively small, quite cramped apartments that cost a lot of money given the space that you're living in. That's how Hong Kong lives. So there must have been a real identification amongst those people, even those who didn't know anyone in the buildings that burned down or didn't lose any friends or relatives. They must really identify with those poor victims.
Yeah, and we see that multiple housing estates, similar to Wang Fu Court, their owners, corporation, the property owners have called emergency meetings questioning the renovation projects that's going on at the same time at this current moment, to ask whether the materials used there were compliant. They asked the construction companies to come and test the materials in front of their eyes. And if they can't find the answer, some of the ownership corporation decided to just take down the netting material around the scaffolding right away, while they try to find out. So, even for myself, one of my friends living in a relatively well-off district, I think in the process they hired, at least one company that's the same one used in Wang Fu Court. I don't know which one it is exactly. But my friend's father basically has been retired. He's in the corporation, and it's been a battle to just get this done. And now this happens, and he literally said his blood pressure goes up every time he sees the news, because thinking of what is going to happen or could have happened to where he lives right now. So yes, a strong sense of identification and sympathy for the victims there.
And Tom, I mean, I guess there is a difference between this sort of raw grief around these terrible fires compared to the more abstract issues of, democracy, freedom or security that we had in 2019, the abstract issue of the extradition law, which did sort of touch on fundamental issues of freedom and law and order inside Hong Kong, but nothing as in your face and as raw and as tragic as this fire. Now, given where Hong Kong is politically, do you think that this will translate into something bigger, than the demonstration we've seen before? Or are people so cowed by the political system now that they'll eventually, the authorities will just count on them going away quietly?
To be honest, I think it's more the latter. I'm more in the cynical camp. We are 10 years into running an independent news outlet here. Most of that time has been during the security law era. And much of any kind of resistance you may imagine has been stamped out. We are going into these patriots-only elections where the system is
explain that, patriots-only elections. Explain that to our audience.
Only patriots can stand. I would think it's more comparable to the Iranian system, maybe, where the candidates are pre-approved. And the traditional opposition, the pro-democracy figures that were famous, all these years, during a 30-year mostly peaceful.
Martin Lee, Claudia Mo, all those people, they're either in jail, right? Or they've been
Claudia's just
silent.
out, but many are in jail. They're in self-exile or they've quit politics, and rarely do you hear from them. So, and 50 civil society groups at least have been disbanded. A lot of the independent media, Apple Daily, etc., the newsrooms have been raided. 1,000 journalists out of work.
Jimmy Lai in jail.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
all these channels of accountability, elections, the media, etc., they've either been minimized, wiped out. The district councils, the local representatives. It is all now a patriotic affair, and the government is very concerned about turnout on Sunday. Everywhere you go, every surface you can imagine is plastered with promotions because it, of course, has to look as credible as possible, and it has been plagued with low turnouts since the electoral revamp. Now, I don't know how sensitively they're going to step around whether they are expecting or encouraging victims of this tragedy to be voting. They won't have access to paperwork and ID. We'll see how that's handled. But they initially thought they might, delay these elections, but they are going to go ahead on Sunday despite everything. But I wouldn't be too overexcited as to this blowing up into any kind of massive protest or anything like that. The authorities have been very swift to make arrests, within hours basically, and it's now up to like 15. So the narrative or whatever is being set as to who's to blame here. It's kind of further along, I think. Should these families seek to organize themselves and demand accountability beyond the construction firms or whatever, then we might, see a bit of trouble there. But I feel that, this is an all-encompassing, all-powerful, multi-billion-dollar national security project with its tentacles in every agency that you can imagine. It is very much a top-down, bottom-up affair, and people know the consequences. And everybody, you'll see them in the comments, when they saw the student speaking out a few days, kind of felt how it was going to go. And an example has been set, put it that way.
Selina, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it could be the most likely scenario, to be honest. It's going to be a lengthy process just to investigate it, prosecute the 15 people arrested. I think the government has taken some, what I think is correct steps to allow that grief to be expressed. They organized the memorials, allowing people in different districts to go to the memorials. They've given information from the police interrogation very quickly. That doesn't usually happen in any criminal investigation. And so if they, give sufficient answers to people and prosecute take some form of prosecution against the perpetrators, so that will help release some of that anger and grief. And in 2012, there was another ferry disaster in Hong Kong where around 40 people died. They had an independent commission at the time led by a judge to investigate it. The police investigated it. It was a very long, drawn-out process that just wrapped this year. And that was 2012, so it took around 13 years. And 13 years later, of course, most of Hong Kong would have moved on, even though most of the families of the victims or the survivors still grieve from it and have to grapple with the outcomes. So I would imagine it takes another 10 years for this affair to finally come to a conclusion. And hopefully in the process, some justice is rendered. I don't imagine there will be, dramatic reforms to tackle this problem at the root. Maybe there will be reform in fire safety regulation, inspection procedures, construction regulation. But ultimately, when it comes to the problems with the ownership corporations, maybe that system will still be in place because it's much harder to fix something at the root than addressing the causes or the things that led to the immediate outcomes.
Finally, Tom, do you think that this fire and this situation in Hong Kong, from the grief to the kind of lack of, real political change that might result from it, to the people who are going to end up in jail for it, do you think it would feel any different if this fire were, heaven forfend, to take place in Hangzhou or in Shanghai? Or is Hong Kong now effectively, even at a tragedy like this, essentially a part of mainland China?
There are some differences still. There is some transparency here. We remain in Hong Kong as a news team because you can go to the courts and bear witness. You can write the first draft of history from the legislature and see what's going on. And you can ask tough questions of officials. And one reporter this morning certainly did ask John Lee directly, are you going to quit, basically?
And that wouldn't happen in Beijing or in Shanghai.
No, you don't get those opportunities. So we are in a different era in Hong Kong. I don't think really any observer, I mean, even some Grenfell victims have said, wow, arrests this quickly. It's hard to complain really about most of how the response has gone. And 155 million, has been raised, some of that government money, mostly from the public. But ultimately, a lot of money flying around. As this process, as Selena says, is going to pan on for the next decade, families may have those bailouts or whatnot, but ultimately they're going to want answers. They're going to want justice. And the government knows that this is where it gets rather sensitive. So they're kind of jittery. There's an All Patriots election coming up, but it's too soon to say, whether all this is going to sort of blow up and how people are going to feel about the government in the medium long term.
All right. Fascinating stuff. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you for your time, and stay safe. Tom Grundy and Selena Cheng, thanks very much for coming on to the Forecast. That's it. Hope you enjoyed the program. See you next time.